Okay, here is part 2 of study guide page 12. It asks us to compare the mechanisms that transport materials across the plasma membrane, i.e. passive transport, diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, and active transport, the pumps, and then endocytosis and exocytosis. For my answer, remember we did this table a few times this year where we did kind of like a T-chart comparing passive transport and active transport. I'm going to talk about passive transport first. Passive transport, as you recall, requires no energy from the cell. It relies on the principles of physics, and it's moving materials with the concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration until evenly distributed. So our types of passive transport include diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. In diffusion, the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to low concentration until evenly distributed happens just across the cell membrane. It's not very complicated. The molecules are able to diffuse through the phospholipid bilayer. Facilitated diffusion is the same as diffusion, the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to low concentration until evenly distributed, but this time the facilitated diffusion is going to use a protein channel, one of these embedded proteins, okay, to move larger molecules across the selectively permeable membrane. Even though it says facilitated, it's still passive transport. It still does not require energy. Osmosis is the movement of water across the semi-permeable membrane. When we're talking about osmosis, we're talking about the solute concentration of the solution in relationship to the cell. And remember, you can be an isotonic solution where you have the same concentration of solutes inside and outside. Hypertonic, where you have a high concentration of solutes on the outside and a low concentration on the inside. And hypotonic, where there is a low concentration of solute on the outside and a high concentration of solute on the inside. So diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis, passive transport. Active transport, yes, does require energy, and energy is in the form of ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We just talked about that. The types of active transport we're going to look at are exocytosis and endocytosis. The EX stands for exit. You see that little molecule trying to get out. It pinches off a part of the actual cell membrane, and then it fuses back together, and the molecule is on the outside of the cell, the vesicle. It's usually a vesicle. Endocytosis, the EN stands for enter. This happens the same. It's just the opposite of exocytosis. A vesicle embeds itself into the cell membrane, and then the cell kind of engulfs it like Pac-Man. Phagocytosis is a type of endocytosis, which are all active transport. And then finally, your pumps. Your sodium-potassium pumps are protein pumps. They look like our little protein channels embedded in the cell membrane. These move sodium and potassium ions against a concentration gradient. So they're moving it from an area of low concentration to high concentration. So opposite passive transport. Okay, so passive transport and active transport. Know this stuff. The two multiple choice questions were carbon dioxide and oxygen are molecules that can move freely. When you see freely, think passive, across a plasma membrane. What determines the direction that carbon dioxide and oxygen molecules move? The answer here is going to be B, the concentration gradient across the plasma membrane. What is the concentration on one side versus the other, on the inside versus the outside? The second multiple choice question said a sodium-potassium pump within a cell membrane requires energy. I made a little note to myself that that is active transport, to move sodium and potassium ions into or out of a cell. The movement of glucose into or out of a cell does not require energy. Which statement best describes the movement of these materials across the cell membrane? Okay, remember for your Keystone, you're going to be allowed to have scrap paper. Use the scrap paper. Make notes for yourself. Take your time. It's not a timed exam. If you need to sit down and draw out this T chart to just jog your memory and help you to think about things, do it. There's no one telling you that you have to hurry up. You can be here all day. A is not correct because it says glucose moves by osmosis, and we know that osmosis is only for water. B is correct. Sodium and potassium move by active transport. Glucose moves by facilitated diffusion, which is a form of passive transport. C is incorrect because facilitated diffusion is passive transport, and that's the same reason that D is incorrect. All right, that concludes page 12.